And we're back here to mock the mock of Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network Zone, one of the best here in the NFL Draft Central world. And he released NFL Mock Draft 2.0. I am a little bit late, but I've had a lot of stuff going on. We're back and we're really going to pick up full force steam going into NFL draft season. But hey, I don't know if there's trades in today's video. I guess we're going to find out here in just a moment. But what I do want to say is that the Steelers draft a quarterback, as we see here with the headline. I think we all can imagine who that's going to be, unless there's a crazy trade up. But let's figure out here as we go along here. Now, I do want to say also before we get into it, if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. This is a relatively new one. And if you enjoy, again, help us get to where we want to go. And number one, the Tennessee Titans, we know this. I think it is a consensus pick at this point, unless they trade out. Cam Ward out of Miami goes to Tennessee and looks to revive this offense. And look, they brought in Dan Moore in free agency. It was an overpay. We all know that. Left tackle, though. So I think it's pretty evident that they're going to be drafting a quarterback in this year's draft, probably at the number one overall pick. And hey, Brian Callahan is their coach. He's an offensive mind, and he inherited Will Levis when he took this job last season. It hasn't worked out. So in order to save his job, let's get a quarterback and at least die on the hill of the quarterback that we selected. Getting Cam Ward at number one makes a lot of sense. Again, helps a desperate offense here in Tennessee. And number two, the Browns get Abdul Carter. I'm a Browns fan, and we just need some good to great talent, I guess, next to Myles Garrett. 2 years ago when he won his Defensive Player of the Year, we got a okay version of Jadeveon Clowney on the other side, and Myles Garrett, for the reason that he was a double team, triple teamed on every single play, he was able to go out there and put up monstrous numbers and win Defensive Player of the Year. Now imagine a talent like Abdul Carter next to Myles Garrett with this young interior defensive line. I think Myles Garrett's going to have he's going to maximize this new contract that he has with his production on the field. And Abdul Carter is also going to be able to come in from day number one and dominate because he's not going to be double teamed from day number one because you simply can't do that when Myles Garrett is on the same field as you. So Abdul Carter, love the pick there. This roster is not ready for a quarterback. So let's continue to build the roster around the quarterback, and maybe a year or two down the line, we address that position. And number three, Shedeur to New York. I've had this in every single mock draft. I love the fit. It just makes too much sense, right? Big name, big market, a guy that is going to a quarterback needy team, and he can take over from day number one. Shedeur Sanders, I love the fit to New York, fills a lot of voids there. And number four, Travis Hunter, the do-it-all kind of a player, goes to New England. I like the selection there. Why? Well, obviously, you can't hate Travis Hunter. He's a tremendous talent, one of a kind, some would say here for Travis Hunter. A guy that wants to play both sides at the next level. Now, whether if he does or not, that's the big question with Travis Hunter. But going to New England, I think he's more so of a receiver than a cornerback because they have a great young secondary led by Christian Gonzalez. So interesting to see how they utilize him there in New England, but they love him. All reports say that they will draft him at number four. Well, if they do or not, that's a different story, right? But if they have the opportunity, I honestly love the fit. He could play some receiver there, or if you need to swap out some of these cornerbacks for a rest or two, Travis could be an amazing boundary or interior corner next to Christian Gonzalez in the division with some pretty good quarterbacks. That's scary for those guys going forward. And number five, Jalen Walker. Interesting because, a couple years ago when Jacksonville had the number one pick, they drafted a project kind of a player, a guy that didn't have a set position in Trayvon Walker. Now, Trayvon Walker this past year finally took that step up, right? Finally turned the corner, and now he's looking to be a very productive NFL player. Jalen Walker is a lot of the same mold of a Trayvon Walker here as a guy that doesn't have a set position. He could be a linebacker. He could be a coverage linebacker. He could be a pass rusher off the edge. And again, he looked like the best football defensive player for Georgia last season, despite all the, I guess, a bit of a down year for Georgia. We'll just say that. But Jalen Walker shined next to Mykel Williams and Malachi Starks. But he looked like the best player on for the entire year. We'll just say that. So Jacksonville goes with another project here. So interesting. Are they going to use Trayvon and Jalen Walker kind of in just like some plays they'll both be linebackers, some plays they'll both be on the edge. I think Jacksonville with Liam Cohen now has a lot of versatility on that defensive front. And number 6, Pete Carroll wants to run the football unless they're on the 1 yard line. That's a joke that you're going to hear a lot here until the season starts. But Ashton Jeanty to a Pete Carroll offense makes a lot of sense. We don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be at this point in time, but let's help them out. Let's make their job easier. And we already have a Brock Bowers who's going to be their safety blanket in the passing game. So let's get in Ashton Jeanty, a guy that we can give the ball to 20 to 25 times a game and have this offense be productive and move the football. We saw an offense last year like the Chargers. They didn't have the greatest wide receiving options outside of a rookie Ladd McConkey, but they were still able to make the playoffs. I think Pete Carroll coming in with a mentality, having to run the football and protect the football, they're going to adopt a lot of the same mentalities and in the same approach that Jim Harbaugh brought to LA last year. And who knows, right? Maybe we could see similar production. It's a very quarterback-friendly scheme in a Chip Kelly offense. I'll say that. Raiders, Ashton Jeanty at 6. To me, I think it's a little bit rich. I know Jeanty's maybe a one-of-a-kind running back. He's a top 5 player on my board. But I just running back at 5 at this or 6 at this point in time in 2025 worries me just a little bit. But Jeanty is definitely a do-it-all kind of a guy. He can carry an offense. And if those are the things you're looking at, maybe it's not a reach at number 6. At number 7, Armand Membou, one of the guys that, I'll say this, he's raised the most as far as his draft stock after the Senior Bowl and Combine weekends. He's an athletic freak. He could play interior. He could play on the outside. Now, in New York, of course, you got a guy like Olu Fashanu, who you could play on the right side of that offensive line. So a guy like Membou, you could slide inside. You can go to the left tackle position. Regardless, if you grab a guy like Membou, he's going to be physical, he's going to be violent, and he's going to help this interior front. And again, I think the biggest winner after this draft pick is not the quarterback, it's not the offense in general, it's Breece Hall, because he's going to be able to run a little bit, cleaner here going into 2025. And number 8, Mason Graham is a steal for the Panthers. Kind of forgot he was still on the board, but hey, the Panthers just need best player available, notably on that defensive line. And hey, Mason Graham is the best in the class, in my opinion. So you get him here at number 8. Love that fit for Carolina. And number 8, Jihaad Campbell, man. Is this your Demario Davis replacement? Is this the heir to the throne of that Mike linebacker spot in New England, or New Orleans, excuse me? Might be. Jihaad Campbell, another guy that's risen up draft boards tremendously over just the last couple of weeks compared to where he was, let's say, in August. But Jihaad Campbell, he can rush the passer. He's good in coverage. He's smart, man, at the linebacker position. He just has a lot of versatility. And Kellen Moore, with this defense now, I think, hey, it's not a bad pick to start off your tenure as a head coach. And again, he could be your Demario Davis replacement down the line when Davis decides to hang it up. Underrated career, by the way. At number 10, Ben Johnson has addressed this offensive line a lot in free agency, going and trading for Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson, signing Drew Dalman, who was one of the best interior centers last year, according to PFF. But that is not enough. Apparently, getting sacked 68 times is not okay for an offense. Bit of a sarcasm there. Caleb Williams was sacked the second most times by a rookie quarterback ever. Right? It was David Carr with a startup franchise in the Houston Texans was number 1 at 70 sacks. Caleb Williams, on an esteemed organization with the Chicago Bears, was sacked 68 times last season. Now, some of those were his fault as a rookie quarterback, and that's expected. But Ben Johnson, I guess, is saying, we don't care about who was on this offensive line last year. They were not good enough. We need to protect our franchise quarterback. Getting Will Campbell, potentially the best offensive lineman in this class at 10, it's a steal for one based on the player talent. But is it the biggest need? I don't know. Maybe it's a receiver. Maybe it's running back. Maybe you go and get an edge rusher here next to a guy like Montez Sweat. But who knows? Chicago addressing that offense, man. Ben Johnson's got another weapon to work with. Jahad Barron, a guy that I've talked in depths about on this channel. And if you have no idea who he is, I'm going to give you a quick rundown. 2 years ago when Texas was in the Big 12. What did he do? Well, he was a slot cornerback and he was first team all Big 12. This past year, they made the transition, Texas did, to the SEC. Jahdae Barron moved to the boundary to be a boundary cornerback, which is not the easiest transition for some corners. And he was first team all SEC. So Jahdae Barron's a baller. He makes a play after play for the Longhorns last year. Huge reason why they made it as far as they did. San Francisco to get him at number 11. Love the value there, especially after they just lost Charvarius Ward to the Colts. And number 12, the Cowboys get Matthew Golden. When I saw in the title that the Cowboys get a receiver, I was almost certain that it was a guy like Tetairoa McMillan, but it's Matthew Golden, man. I'm starting to think he's a little bit overrated, at least overpriced. I'll say that. Not overrated, overpriced in these mock drafts where I was high on him. I loved him ever since the midseason mark last year. I talked about him over on my podcast, which I'll link down below, closing in on 18,000 of you beautiful people, or whether otherwise known as subscribers. I was raving about Matthew Golden. But I never thought he was going to be the number one wide receiver off the board. Whether if you classified Travis as that or Tetairoa McMillan, I didn't think Golden would be a top 12 pick. But here we are with his 4.2940, a guy that's going to an offense with CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and a new head coach there in Dallas. Maybe Matthew Golden could be the piece they need to get back to offensive excellence there for America's team, or so they say. That is their moniker. At number 13, the Miami Dolphins, they need interior offensive linemen, but Daniel Jeremiah says there's enough depth down the board. Let's try that again. Enough depth down the board. There we go. That's a tongue twister. He says, hey, let's go out there and just get best player available. We just lost Javon Holland on the back end. Malachi Starks, playmaker out of Georgia, my number one rated safety in a close race there with a guy down the board. He goes there to help out that back end in Miami. Love that pick in a division where you got good quarterbacks like, of course, Josh Allen, who's the reigning MVP, and a very promising rookie in Drake May, who is looking to take some strides this year. Malachi, hopefully he can, halt the progression of both of those quarterbacks. Now at 14, Tyler Warren, it's a match made in heaven. This is an offense under Shane Steichen that wants to run the football. Tyler Warren is a great run blocker, potentially the best in the class. And Anthony Richardson, he's not the best as far as accuracy, but Tyler Warren could be his safety blanket underneath. I love the pick. I also want to see them add an outside weapon down the board in this draft, maybe like a Jaden Higgins in round 2 or 3, maybe another guy like a Jack Beck to be underneath. Whatever they want to do in Indy, interested to see, but I want to see them add another weapon offensively. Getting Tyler Warren, heck of a start. At 15, Atlanta needs edge rushers because they were the worst sack team in the league last year. They had the least amount. But again, Daniel Jeremiah says there's enough depth down the board. We're going to go out there and get a cornerback next to A.J. Terrell and Will Johnson, potentially the best pure cornerback in the class. And I say best pure corner because Travis is an athlete, right? Wide receiver and corner. Will Johnson has an argument to be the best pure corner in the class. The reason why he's falling this far is because of his injury history. Over the last 2 or so years, he's had a lot of banged up knick-knack injuries, and you don't want to see that out of a guy that you're drafting with a potentially top half of the first round draft pick. But Will Johnson, when he's on the field, he's dominant. He checks all the boxes as a grade A corner, and Atlanta gets him here at number 15 due to his lengthy injury history. At 16, Gray Zabel. It's really are you on this train or are you off this train? Some mock drafts that we've looked at on this channel don't even have Gray Zabel as a first-round pick. Daniel Jeremiah has him going 16 here to the Arizona Cardinals, who could pretty much use everything going into next year. They really just need the best player available at this point. I would go other directions, but Gray Zabel, he can literally play any position on the offensive line. He did it at college at North Dakota State. He's hopefully looking to do something like that at the next level, but obviously I think he's a guard for the Arizona Cardinals, and he's going to hopefully open up this run game for James Conner, for Kyler Murray, for Trey Benson, who is the rookie running back they drafted last year. Arizona should be more of a balanced offense going forward. Gray Zabel helps with that. At 17, Mike Green with his off-the-field questions. drops here to the Cincinnati Bengals. Tremendous player. I think at this point in time, Cincinnati needs to figure out what are we doing with the NFL sack leader in Trey Hendrickson. Are we going to extend him? Are we just going to try and get him to work things out for one more year and then figure it out down the line? Whatever they do, but if they can bring back Hendrickson and Mike Green, it's going to help out this defensive front there in Cincinnati, and they need it. Seattle gets Colston Loveland. I like that pick. You brought in Cooper Kupp this offseason after losing guys like Metcalf, who you traded away, a franchise legend and cornerstone in Tyler Lockett. I would love to see Tyler Lockett back on the field with Seattle. Can you imagine a route running between JSN, Tyler Lockett, and Cooper Kupp? I don't know who's stepping in front of them or who wants to step in front of them. Safe to say they're going to be playing a lot of zone coverage against the Seattle offense. But you also brought in Sam Darnold, who you're hoping can elevate your ceiling to, again, get to the playoffs and hopefully further into the big dance. But for Seattle, getting a guy like Colston Loveland, first off, he ends this cycle of okay tight ends that you've had over the last couple of years, really since a guy like Jimmy Graham. So you're ending this, I guess, okay cycle of tight ends, but he's also a great run blocker. So it opens up lanes for Charbonnet, for Ken Walker, guys like that in this offense. He's just a perfect fit pretty much in any offense. But for Seattle, I like it. It's another weapon for this offense if you don't bring back a guy like Tyler Lockett. At 19, the Bucks, Donovan Onwuzurike. Interesting. I'm sitting here and Tetairoa McMillan, 6'5", big body consensus, top 2 wide receiver in this class, is still on the board. But I love Donovan Onwuzurike. We're going to talk about him soon, man. He's my 1A favorite edge to watch in this class. And again, I'm going to take credit for this because a couple weeks ago I released my edge rusher rankings before the combine, and that was kind of with your base knowledge on each player, kind of just what their background and their production was. When I watched the tape of Donovan Onwuzurike, I was already high on him. So now that the world is coming around to it, I'm just kind of happy to see it. But Onwuzurike, 16 and a half sacks last season. He's dominant. He's got all the physical tools, and he's going to a Todd Bowles defense that desperately needs edge rushers. Omarion Hampton, a guy that I was super high on because I was like, he's going to be the most coveted player in round 2 in the last couple of years. But now, again, these scouts and, again, some of these draft experts are hearing rumblings. And Omarion Hampton is pretty much solidified to be a number 1 or first round pick at this point in time. He goes to a Sean Payton offense that wants to run the football. They lost Javonte Williams. Okay. Now we're going to have Audric Estime and Omarion Hampton going forward. All of a sudden, we have 2 great backs like we did in New Orleans with Pierre Thomas and Reggie Bush for some time. Then we had Kamara and Mark Ingram for some time. Sean Payton loves 2 dominant running backs that he can work in and out. And Omarion Hampton joining Audric Estime, of course, last year's rookie out of Notre Dame, is huge. And I like that for Denver's offense and for the sake of Omarion Hampton. Let's not forget that they added Evan Ingram, so they don't necessarily need a weapon as much as they did a couple weeks ago. Pittsburgh gets Jackson Dart, another guy that is flying up draft boards. He was my favorite quarterback to watch personally over the last couple of weeks. Now, I don't have him rated higher than a guy like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. Let me make that clear. But Jackson Dart was by far and away the number 3 quarterback on pretty much everyone's board, and especially mine. Love to see his film from day one. Quick release. He's tough. He's very competitive. He has this mentality of go-getter. And I just like to see that. So even if Pittsburgh does go out and get Aaron Rodgers, which it looks like they are at this point in time, he's going to be a great mentor for Jackson Dart from day number 1. And Jackson Dart gets to learn from a first ballot Hall of Famer. Not too many of those walking around in 2025, or at least at this point in their careers, right? At 22, the Chargers get Ted McMillan. Love to see that. He falls to a team that desperately needs not only another option offensively, but a number 1 guy offensively. Ladd McConkey's great. He's going to be a star in this league for years, but they need a boundary number 1 kind of a receiver. They brought back Mike Williams, but he's only going to be playing 4 weeks because he gets hurt after like the first month of every year. So you get Ted McMillan, Mike Williams, you got Ladd in the middle, you still got some other solid options outside, and then you have an offense that wants to run the football, bringing in Najee Harris. Love that for Justin Herbert, but also this offense. At 23, Maxwell Harrison, This is another player where you're on him or you're off of him. He goes 23 here to the Green Bay Packers. We don't know what's going to go on with Jaire Alexander, as Daniel Jeremiah states here. I do think he's going to be back in a Packer uniform. So to bring Jaire back and to also draft Maxwell Harrison, it's huge in a division that has very talented wide receivers. I like that pick there for Green Bay. I would prefer edge rusher, but getting a boundary cornerback, especially with the future of Alexander in, I guess you don't in limbo, right? You don't know what's going to happen. Like that pick there for Green Bay. Now, Nick Emmanwori is flying up draft boards as well. Athletic freak, right? He can do everything on the field, play in the box, on the boundary as a zone corner, and he can also play man-to-man with some of these tight ends. He can do everything as he did for the Gamecocks and their tremendous defense on the second half of the year. He's a first-round pick now to the Minnesota Vikings, a team that doesn't have a second-round pick. So they really need to capitalize and get the best player available here at pick 24. Harrison Smith, look, this is the reason why I've had Malachi Starks to the Vikings in every mock draft so far. Harrison Smith, who's been a cornerstone for this franchise, is entering the tail end of his career. Next year might be his last. So let's get his heir apparent. Let's get a guy that, at least for 1 year, they can play together and wreak havoc on this back end. So Emmanwori, Harrison Smith, love that pairing for at least a year there in Minnesota. Houston gets Kelvin Banks at 25. Tremendous value after losing, of course, Laramie Tunsil and Kenyon Green on this offensive line. To get a Kelvin Banks, a guy that might be the best overall tackle in the class, depending on who you ask, at 25, love that pick. Rebuilding the blind side for C.J. Stroud. Now for the Rams, they're going to go with Trey Amos out of the Ole Miss Rebels. I love this Ole Miss defense, as you guys have seen in my rankings videos. Again, months ago, they're outdated. So if you go back to them, just know that I've updated those in a lot of different ways. But since then, you know, I like Princely Umanmielen. I like Trey Amos. I like my favorite player in the class is Walter Nolan, and that includes everybody. This Ole Miss defense has a lot of intriguing prospects coming into this year's draft. And Trey Amos, to go on the boundary next to Jalen Ramsey, they already have a young and promising defensive front. To get Trey Amos, again, you're quietly turning yourself into a Super Bowl contender if Trey Amos can come in instantly and contribute. Let's not forget they have Cam Kinchens on the back end, who was my second favorite player in last year's draft. This Rams defense, man, I love it. And let's not forget they have a star-studded offense despite losing Cooper Kupp. Now at 27, the Ravens need offensive line, but Daniel Jeremiah has them going simply with an AFC North kind of a player. Now, to play in the AFC North, I'm sure like other divisions, there's certain players that fit the mold to play in that division. For the AFC North, it's tough. It's a battle. You got to get players that are ready to go to war, and because that's just how these games are. They're very physical. Whether if it's a team that's really good or bad, early in the season, late in the season, you need to be ready to go. Derek Harmon brings that mentality. Last year, transferred to Oregon, and he dominated. His stats don't even do him justice, and he goes out there to join this defensive front to play in a division where they'd like to run the football. Pittsburgh, who's their quarterback? They're going to want to run the football. The Browns, Chubb will be back, and they're going to want to run the football. For Cincy, you just want to get after Joe Burrow, right? So Derek Harmon to come to this defensive front. I love the pick for Baltimore, and they're going to have to address offensive line down the board now. Mykel Williams falls to 28 for the Detroit Lions, a guy that I've had going in the early 20s to a team like Pittsburgh. But for him to go to 28 to the Detroit Lions, love it, man. He's productive when he's on the field. He did have a little bit of an injury this past season, which kind of halted his production overall. But outside of that, Mykel Williams is dominant. He's an athletic freak. If you're a Lions fan and you're not sold on him, just look at him. I think you're going to change your mind. At 29, Azariah Thomas, the Seminole, goes here in the first round. A lot of surprises in today's video as far as who's getting into the first round and who's falling out of it. But the Commanders get Azariah Thomas. He's a long, lengthy corner, and he's got the speed to keep up with anybody. So Washington gets a much-needed corner next to Lattimore there in that secondary. Again, a division that has a lot of talented receivers. You need these cornerbacks for depth reasons, right? For 30, the Bills get Kenneth Grant, potentially the second best defensive interior lineman in this class. and you get him at pick 30. You can't go wrong for defense that, sure, they still have Ed Oliver. They still have Ogunjobi. But do you need some more help up front in that division, especially when you go and play teams like the Kansas City Chiefs at number 31, who addressed the offensive line, Josh Simmons out of the Ohio State Buckeyes. A guy that, look, was very promising to start the year last year, but had an ACL injury. So you worry about that, but he should be back and ready to go. I know Kansas City brought in some offensive linemen this free agency, so maybe you don't go offensive lineman. Maybe you test the waters, go out there and get a running back or a receiver. But I think just continuing to add to this offensive line, an offensive line that has struggled to protect 15 since he took over, it's never a bad idea. So Chiefs going offensive tackle at the spot, I like that idea. And to round it out in Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft 3.0, Philly just replaces Josh Sweat like that. Shamar Stewart, maybe the freakiest athlete at the combine, as he, I guess, shocked a lot of us with his athletic profile just a few weeks back. Goes to Philadelphia. They get another project. They get to replace Josh Sweat to a degree. And Shamar Stewart, his production, I know people worry about, but if you turn on the film, you'll see this. You'll see effort concerns, which is one thing that I think is something you got to look at and you got to worry about for the next level. But outside of the effort concerns and finishing plays, his production was not there because he was not disruptive. It was there because that wasn't his role. As crazy as that sounds, in that Aggies defense, they were asked to set the edge. And you'll see that clearly on tape because I was not a big fan of Shamar Stewart until I turned on the tape. He was asked to set the edge, not to rush the passer. In Philly, he's going to be able to do what he's actually supposed to do, which is to rush Dak Prescott, to rush Jaden Daniels, and of course the other quarterbacks in this division. But that's going to do it here. Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft 3.0 on my end. This channel is going to start to ramp up here. I've been a little lackluster. We've had some stuff going on outside of the works. But hey, we're going to ramp it up here. Draft season around the corner. I'm excited to bring that content for you guys. But until then, man, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you made it to this point. And until next time, get out of here.